So last session we learned about how do we deal with methods in class, right? So we learned about class members. In class members, properties, accessors, and methods. Now in the class, one more important we need to know about constructor. So generally in every object oriented programming language you will come across with the concept of constructor, right? So if anyone asks what is the purpose of constructor, means in JavaScript also class will have a constructor. Now the point, what is the purpose of constructor, right? Actually in object oriented programming, constructor is used for instantiation. Constructor is used for instantiation. Instantiation is nothing but the method of object creation. Object creating is handled by constructor. Constructor is used for instantiation. So instantiation is nothing but the process of creating object for class. Technically, constructor is used for instantiation. Instantiation is the process of creating object for class. It is the process of creating object for class. So here many times in object oriented programming, when you learned about constructor, you might have learned that constructor is used for initializing values. So constructor is not only for initializing values. The main purpose of constructor is instantiation. That means creating of object. The way of creating object, configuring object, and allowing a class to create an object and provide all the members through that object, this process is called as instantiation. And constructor plays the key role in instantiation. Now, technically, you should know that constructor is a special type of method in class. Constructor is a special type of method in class that executes automatically. Constructor is a special type of method in class that executes automatically. So constructor is same like a method, but it is a special type of method that executes automatically. Means I will show you one simple example how we use a constructor here. Means what is the purpose of a constructor. Suppose see, I am creating a class here, class as database. This database class have a method called insert. This insert method is a return type void, and here console.log, it have an option record inserted. Now similarly we have another option, so like delete, and it is void console.log, we have record deleted. So we have two actions to be performed by this class. One is inserting and deleting. But before inserting, before deleting, first we have to connect with the database. After connecting, we have to handle insert or delete. So connection with database is required before inserting and updating. Now, if I give that connection work to another method like public connect, it is a method, it is void type, and here I am giving that work console.log connected with the database. So connected to database. Okay. Now what is problem here is whenever you are trying to insert, whenever you are trying to delete, so before insert, before delete, you have to call connect also, because connect is an ordinary method. If it is an ordinary method, you have to call that method. Every time we have to call this method. So insert we have to call, delete we have to call, and connect also we have to call. But we want this connection to happen automatically every time before insert or before delete. In that case, instead of giving this work to a method, we can give this work to a constructor. That means instead of giving this work to a method, we can give that work to a constructor. That means here we write a constructor like this. You already know in JavaScript, constructor will not have a name. Constructor is defined with the keyword constructor, and constructor is not having a name. Internally, the class name is used for constructor. Generally, constructor is called anonymous. Anonymous means without name. Now, I am giving this work to a constructor. I am configuring the work to a constructor. Here, constructor is little different from other programming languages. Generally, in TypeScript, so every class implicitly have a constructor. Every class internally have a constructor. And TypeScript constructor is anonymous. That means no name for constructor. So that means we define like this. So we have a class, and the syntax I will give here. We have a class and a class name, and here we have to put a constructor. Constructor is anonymous, just we have to define some functionality. That is how we create a constructor in TypeScript. Same, this is also same in JavaScript, no change. In JavaScript also, constructor is defined in the same way. Constructor, now constructor, you see here, we have a constructor and we define some functionality. Now, when I create an object, let, some Oracle is equal to new database. Actually, when you are creating an object for a class, I hope you already learned in JavaScript. In other programming languages, for this database, we generally use parentheses like this. That parenthesis is not required. So actually, we don't need that parenthesis. You can simply stop here, and you can just access Oracle dot. I want insert. We can access that insert. Now what happens is, before it calling the insert, it calls the constructor, then insert. That means constructor is a special type of method that executes automatically for every object. For every object, it will execute automatically. And this is okay. This is enough. Generally, in other programming languages, people have an habit of giving the class name with a parenthesis. Actually, here also we need it, but not every time. Here without parenthesis also it will work. It will work. What is that parenthesis? Parenthesis is actually, that is nothing but, so we have a constructor. We have a constructor. This constructor is anonymous, without name. Generally, in JavaScript, anonymous functions, any anonymous function is called with an empty parenthesis. We can call an anonymous function by using empty parenthesis. I hope you already learned in JavaScript. For example, in JavaScript, you already learned this. Suppose here I am writing a function. So I am writing a function without name. Document.write. So anonymous function. Anonymous function. This function is not having a name. So a function without name is called as anonymous function. Then how do you call it? Generally, anonymous functions are enclosed in a enclosed in a parenthesis. Anonymous functions are enclosed in a parenthesis. And how to access that anonymous function? Currently, it is not working. You see, it is empty. It is not working. It is empty. How to call it? Anonymous functions are called by using an empty parenthesis. This empty parenthesis is referring to the anonymous function. Referring to anonymous function. And you can see that it is working fine. That means anonymous functions are called by using an empty parenthesis. Empty parenthesis. That is general thing in JavaScript. That means in JavaScript, functions can be defined without name. And if functions are defined without name, they are called as anonymous. And anonymous functions are called with an empty parenthesis. The class you have seen here, you can see this is the class. Now you can see this is the class. In that class, we have a constructor. Constructor is not having a name. That means it is anonymous. Then how do you call that anonymous function here? We have to call that after class name, anonymous function is empty parenthesis. After the class name, we use empty parenthesis, that is anonymous. But do we need to call that mandatory? Not required until or unless it needs some parameters. So because even you don't define, automatically you can see internally it is calling the constructor. It is calling the constructor. So constructor is automatically executed. So before the ordinary methods are executed. So you can see now constructor is a special type of method. You can see. Let me compile this. And here TSC index.ts TSC index.ts and the node index.js. Now you can see it is working fine. That means I just called only insert, but before inserting, it is connecting with database. So what is the purpose of constructor? The purpose of constructor is to define actions, which need to get ready before you actually start any explicit action. That means whenever you create an object, I want some actions to get ready. I want some actions to make the platform ready so that I can do my work. So some actions we need not to call. Some actions need to be performed before we call them. Then such actions we can give to constructor. And see here, I am not using any parenthesis for the constructor. I need that if the constructor is expecting parameters. If constructor is expecting parameter, that means if constructor is expecting parameter like DB name, that means database name. Database name is some string type. And here I am giving a message connected to, and I will put an expression. Here I will say DB name. Now this time the constructor is expecting parameter. If constructor is expecting parameter, now your declaration is wrong. So why this declaration is wrong? Because it is having an anonymous function which requires parameter. Now, so I am defining parameter, but I don't want to pass the parameter. Observe, if I make this parameter optional, we learned that parameter can be optional. If I make that parameter as optional, question mark, now this is okay. Because constructor is expecting parameter, but it is not mandatory. If you don't pass the parameter, then it will be undefined. You have to verify, is it undefined or not? If we don't pass any parameter, then automatically it will be undefined because it is expecting and using it. So technically, if parameter is passed, if parameter is mandatory, then at the time of creating object, we have to call the constructor. And we have to pass value into it. Suppose I am passing the value that is Oracle. Because it is a string type, I need to pass the string type here. So defining the constructor, that means how do we class? Here we will use let obj is equal to new class name. This is enough. Or you can also define like this. Let obj is equal to new class name and an empty parenthesis. So both will call the constructor. That means, so this empty parenthesis is required in TypeScript. Only when constructor is expecting parameters. Constructor is expecting parameter values. When constructor is expecting parameter values, then only we need this parenthesis to define. Otherwise, not required. Actually, in other programming languages, it is mandatory. That means even your constructor is empty, it is not expecting parameters. You have to pass the constructor type. We have to define that constructor. But in TypeScript and JavaScript, they are optional. You don't need to mention the constructor until or unless it requires parameters. So that is important. So now I will pass the parameter here and run this. You can see here, compile and run this index.js. Then it says connected to Oracle database and insert. That means we are using a constructor and into that we are passing some parameters. This example I will give here. So the point, constructor can be parameterized or parameterless. Constructor can be parameterized or parameterless, without parameters or with parameters. So if constructor is parameterized, then the values are passed the values are passed, then the values are passed at the time of allocating memory for object, at the time of allocating memory for object. At the time of allocating memory for object, we have to pass the values. That means when you are allocating memory, that means let obj is equal to new. What is this new? What is this new? New class name. You are defining the new class name. What is that new? New is dynamic memory allocating operator. New is dynamic memory allocating operator. It is an operator that allocates memory. That means new is a memory allocating operator. This memory allocating operator allocates memory, and for which class it will allocate the memory? The class name, and loads all its members into that memory. Now you can access those members with reference of object. That means at the time of allocating memory, we have to pass the parameters. Parameters are passed at the time of allocating memory. Some people wrongly give the definition. When we ask like when to pass parameter, many people tell that at the time of creating object. At the time of creating object. That is wrong statement. Why? Because this is object created. That is object created. Let obj. That is object created. After object created, this is initializing memory. So that means at the time of initializing memory for that object, we have to pass the values. So you should not say that at the time of creating object. You should say that at the time of allocating memory. At the time of allocating memory for object, we can pass the values into it, right? So this is small example. I will copy this example. This is for constructor. Now here, so many points are there. That means some new things you have to know. First point, how to write a constructor, how to pass the parameters, and how do we use the parameters. Those two things you have learned. And important is, so constructor allows all parameters same as methods. What are the method parameters? Constructor parameters also same. That means we can have single parameter, we can have multiple parameters, we can have optional parameters, we can have rest parameters. Yesterday we learned rest parameters. All the parameters are same. You can have an object parameter, you can have an array parameter, any kind. That means all constructor parameters same like methods. But some limitations are there. What are the limitations? TypeScript will not allow private, public, or protected access modifier for constructor. Will not allow access modifiers for constructor. Actually, access modifiers are allowed for constructors in other languages. In other object-oriented programming languages, constructor can be private, constructor can be protected, constructor can be public. But here they are not supported. That means, so constructor cannot constructor cannot be private. You cannot have a private constructor. Constructor cannot be public. You don't need these access modifiers, not required. By default, it is public. You cannot have protected. That means you don't need that protected. The access modifiers are not required. Access modifiers are not required and not used here. And one more point is, so generally, so TypeScript will not allow constructor overloading. Will not allow constructor overloading, which is allowed in other programming languages. Constructor overloading means there can be more than one constructor in a class, but here only one. Here only one. That means by default there will be an implicit constructor. You can create only one constructor. So TypeScript will not allow constructor overloading. So only one explicit constructor is allowed in class. Only one explicit constructor is allowed in class. Explicit means external. Implicit means internally, right? If you don't define any constructor, by default, a constructor will be there. So if anybody asked you the question, what is the role of default constructor? What do you say? What is the role of default constructor? Even you don't define a constructor, by default one constructor will be there in a class. What is the role of it? What is the role of default constructor? What do you say? What is the role of default constructor? The role of default constructor, the default constructor role, its role is, it is used for instantiation. It is used for instantiation. Instantiation means creating objects. Constructor is responsible for creating object. Creating object means it is the process of allocating memory for the object, loading all the members of class in the memory so that we can access those members by using object. So the main purpose of default constructor is instantiation. Then what is the role of explicit constructor? Explicit constructor. What is the role of explicit constructor? The role of explicit constructor. What is the role of explicit constructor? Just now we saw na explicit constructor. So to define actions that are performed to define actions that are performed automatically, actions that are performed automatically for every object. Actions to be performed automatically for every object. For every object, some actions need to be performed automatically. Those actions are given inside the constructor. Some actions need to be performed automatically, and those actions are defined by using an explicit constructor, right? So constructor little bit different from other programming languages, and all concepts are same, because in JavaScript also we use similar constructor, we use similar. Now while working with constructor, you learned one more rule. The rule is nothing but, so if you are, this is very important rule, if you are extending a class, if you are extending a class, then the derived class constructor, derived class constructor, derived class constructor must have a super call. This is very important. I will explain this sentence. If you are extending a class, then derived class constructor must have a super call. That is mandatory. If you are extending a class, then derived class constructor must have a super call. This is mandatory. I will just explain the sentence. I will show you, then you can understand. See, actually that is basic rule actually. In other programming languages also, that is rule. For example, you are learning Java, .NET or some other languages, C++, OOP languages. Suppose we have class, so we have A. And actually, A class will have a constructor. It will have a constructor. That means A class is having a constructor. That is constructor. Similarly, you have a class B. B class is also having a constructor. Remember, even you don't define a constructor, by default, they have constructors. Now, generally what happens is, I created this B class. This B class is extending A. The class B is extending A. If it is extending A and you created an object for the B class, then what happens is, so before it calls the B class constructor, first A class constructor will come. As per the order, first A class constructor will come. After that, B class constructor will come. So what is the order? Order is first A class constructor, after that B class constructor. That means every time first base class constructor will come, then followed by derived class. This internally happens in every object oriented programming language, and this is the rule of OOP. In object oriented programming language, the extensibility inheritance rule is every derived class constructor will call a base class constructor. First base class constructor, then followed by derived class. But unfortunately, in JavaScript and TypeScript, it will not happen. In JavaScript and TypeScript, internally, the base class constructor is not called. If you create an object for derived class, only derived class constructor is called. But as per the rules of object-oriented programming, it is mandatory to call the base class constructor first, then followed by derived class. See what happens. So I am creating a class. This is base. This base class is having a constructor. I will just give a name, console.log. I will give as base class constructor. That is the point. Similarly, I have a class, another class, we have derived. This derived class is also having a constructor, and every class can have a constructor. Console.log, we have derived class constructor. Now, in the derived class constructor, derived class is extending, it is extending base class. Now we have problem. When derived class extending base class, now we have a problem. The problem is, you see, the problem, it says that constructors for derived class must contain a super call. Must contain a super call. That is mandatory. That means as per the rules of object oriented programming, that means as per the rules of object oriented programming, the constructor of base class must be called before the constructor of derived class. In Java, .NET, other programming languages, it internally does. Internally, derived class will automatically invoke the base class constructor. But in TypeScript and JavaScript, it can't. In that way, we have to manually call this. That means what we have to do? How to call the base class constructor inside the derived class constructor by using super keyword, by using super. That is done. By using super keyword. That means what this super keyword can do, it can access the base class constructor and it can use them here. So this is very important rule while working with constructors. That means this is a rule in all object oriented programming languages, but in other object oriented programming languages, they internally implement this rule. But in TypeScript and JavaScript, they don't do that. That is the reason explicitly we have to do it. That means explicitly, when you create a constructor in both derived class and base class, it is mandatory to call the base class constructor. Otherwise, it cannot work. Now see, you create an object let obj is equal to new which class? Derived class, and through just obj. So we are just creating an object, then automatically constructors are called, right? That means I will compile and run this. I just created an object. Both constructors are working. And first base class constructor, then followed by derived. In every object oriented programming, this is the basic rule. First base class constructor, then followed by derived. And in other programming languages, it internally happens, so you don't have a problem. So here it internally doesn't happen, so we have to manually call. So that is the point actually. If you are extending a class, then derived class constructor must have a super call. So that means the base class constructor is called in derived class by using super method. By using super method, we do that. Syntactical example I will give here. This is an example. This is very important. I hope you understood the rule about the constructor, right? So while working with constructors, some basic rules you have to know. And in TypeScript, these are the rules for constructor. So you cannot have multiple constructors because constructor overloading is not supported. And you don't need to mention any access modifier for constructor. They are not supported. Another constructor can support all the parameters same like methods. Now one more point you have to know about constructor. Actually, this constructor is responsible for handling another important point. Actually, many times this is the concept also. Why multiple inheritance is not supported for class. Why multiple inheritance is not supported for class? Actually, you saw that multiple inheritance is supported for contract interface. For interface, I showed you multiple inheritance is supported. Now, for class, why multiple inheritance is not supported? Why multiple inheritance is not supported for class? multiple inheritance is not supported for the class here. So what is the perfect answer for this generally? Means why multiple inheritance is not supported? Why it is supported for interface? Interface supports it, but here it will not support. The technical answer is, so that is because of constructor. So because of constructor deadlock. Because of constructor deadlock. That is actually the technical answer. So because of constructor deadlock. That is the technical answer. I will explain what is meant by constructor deadlock. Many times at learning level, people give an answer for this as ambiguity issues will come. That means everybody have only one answer for this. Ambiguity issues will come. What is meant by ambiguity issue? Generally for OOP language learners, if we ask this question, they say that ambiguity issues will come. That is the reason multiple inheritance is not supported. What is meant by ambiguity? Ambiguity issues means when we ask what is ambiguity, then because OOP language learners, they give this answer. Why multiple inheritance is not supported? They say ambiguity issues will come. Ambiguity issues means they talk about same name members, same type members and all this actually. But that is not the correct point. Actually, this is also related to here. This is also related to, actually this is also related to constructor only. Constructor. What is meant by constructor deadlock? Just a point I will explain here. See, suppose here we have class. So we have super 1. We have class super 2. We have class super 3. And you know every class will have a constructor. Every class have a constructor. Implicitly it is having a constructor. Now we have a class called derived. We have a class derived. And this derived class is also having a constructor. This derived class also having a constructor. Now as I told you, as per the rules of object-oriented programming, we have to call the superclass constructor in derived by using which keyword? Super. And this derived class is extending actually super 1, it is extending super 2, it is extending super 3. It is extending super 3. Now this super refers to which superclass constructor? This refers to which superclass constructor? Is it super 1? Is it super 2? Is it super 3? There is no order actually. There is no order. Now actually what happens is, see, what happens is the memory is allocated. The memory is allocated. Now in this memory, one constructor should come. Only one constructor is allowed. In that memory, only one constructor is allowed to create an object. Now what happens is, this into the memory, only one constructor is allowed. If one constructor comes into it, this extension is finished. But what happens is, this superclass 1 constructor is waiting for superclass 2 to go into the memory. This superclass 2 is waiting for superclass 3 to go into memory. Superclass 3 constructor is waiting for 2 to go into memory. All are waiting for each other. No one is going into memory. Because they don't know the priority. All constructors are waiting for each other. No constructor is going into memory. That means this situation is called as deadlock. Deadlock is a situation where everyone is waiting for each other. Deadlock is a situation where everyone is waiting for each other and no one is going. This is called deadlock situation. Now, this deadlock situation comes when there are constructors. That is the reason multiple inheritance is not supported, because object cannot be created. Constructors keep waiting. All constructors are waiting for each other. No constructor goes in and object is not created. That means this is because of constructor deadlock. Now, this is very simple. Why it is supported for interface? Why it is supported for interface? Because interface don't have constructor. Interface don't have constructor. Why it is supported for interface? Because interface don't have constructor. Interface also can have same name members problem, but that is not the concept. The concept is constructor, allocating memory. That means why multiple inheritance is supported for interface and not supported for class. So what do you say? Who is responsible for that? Multiple inheritance is not supported because of constructor. Because of constructor. Why it is supported for interface? Because interface don't have any constructors. If interface is not having a constructor, there is no deadlock issues. Deadlock means all constructors are waiting for each other and no constructor is going, and that means object is not created. So why multiple inheritance is not supported for class? Because of constructor deadlock. And the question is, why multiple inheritance is supported for interface? Why multiple inheritance is supported for interface? The answer is, so because interface don't have constructor. Interface don't have constructors. So interface don't have any constructor. So there is no deadlock. So no deadlock. That is the prime reason why multiple inheritance is supported for interfaces and not supported for classes. That is basic thing. So while working with the class, so we have to understand this. Already we know that, right? Technically we have classes with only what members? Classes can have only what members? Properties, methods, accessors, and constructor. Can we have variables in a class? We cannot have variables in a class. Can we have functions in a class? We cannot have functions in a class. But we can access variables and we can access functions. We cannot have variables and all these in the class. So class can have only 5 members. What are those? 4. Properties, methods, accessors, and constructors. Only these 4 members can be in the class. And I discussed detailed basic points about them. I hope you are clear with all the class members. So what are properties, what are methods, and what are constructors, and what are accessors, and how do we use them, and what are the basic points you need to know. Majority same like JavaScript, some changes are there in TypeScript. I explained them. Okay. Now next important, that means after understanding the class and class members, now we need to know another option is, so you learn 2 options. One is contracts. Contracts means how to create interfaces, contracts. Another one you learned about class. How do we define the class? Class is called as an entity or model or blueprint or anything, right? So we learned about contracts and classes, how to define contracts and classes. Next, very important is, this is very important, we have to know about templates. After contracts and classes, now next very important, you need to know about templates. Templates in OOP. What is a template and how to design the templates? What is the purpose of templates? We will see now. This is another very important. Here you will see a very big hierarchy, right? What is template and how it actually works, we will see. Actually, we discussed that class is a program template. It is a program template. But in object-oriented programming, we have templates. In OOP languages, we have to design templates. Why we need templates? What is the purpose of templates? Let's see. First, you need to understand the purpose of templates. Why we need templates? Actually, in real world, I will just give first basic point. Real world projects are classified into following types actually. First, you need to know this to understand the concept of templates. Real world projects are classified into, we have end-to-end, or we call as implementation. We have support, and we have upgrade, and we have rollout. In software companies, when you are working for projects, the projects are classified mainly into these 4 types. We have end-to-end, support, upgrade, and rollout projects. For experienced people, they have to choose into which project they want to go. That means, for example, if you have several years of experience, then companies will come and ask you, we want for support. Are you interested in support? We want for upgrade. Do you have any experience in upgrade? Such questions are asked. I will explain. Basic point I will tell you. Means end-to-end project means some client came to us. Suppose a hospital client. So, and that hospital client wants a software for him. He asked us to build an application for his hospital management. And we started building application for his requirements step by step from basic. That means they don't have any application earlier. They want an application, and we started building that application. That is end-to-end. End-to-end means we are building an application newly for client. For client, we are building an application. Support means already we built an application and we given that application to client. We already built an application and given that application to client. He is using it. While using, if he gets any technical issue, then we have to solve. That is support. Support here, remember, freshers role will be only in end-to-end. In support, in upgrade, in rollout, freshers will not work. They can't work. So fresher role always will be in end-to-end only. Support means you should have very good experience because you need to support the business. That means application is already built. They are using it. And if any technical problem comes, we have to resolve. That is support. Upgrade means already we built application in one version. After few days, the new version of that software came. And the client wants the new features also. He says that in that new version, that new feature is there. I want that in my application. In that case, what we have to do, we have to upgrade our old version to new. It will take few months of time, 1-2 months of time it will take to upgrade from one version to another, depending on the scale of project, right? Those kind of projects are called upgrade projects. Another one, rollout project means rollout is nothing but, for example, what happened is, suppose we have some Tata. For Tata people, so or say, suppose, yeah, because Tata have their own. So here is, suppose they say we have Reliance. For Reliance people, IBM built an application for Reliance, suppose Reliance Oil. For Reliance Oil, so IBM have built an application to maintain their business, and that is in India. That means in India, Reliance Oil business is maintained by a software developed by IBM. So that entire business is maintained. Now what Reliance people are planning to expand their business to France. That means they want the same business, that means the same Reliance Oil business to France. And they want an application to be maintained for that France business. Now IBM have to build another application for France business. IBM have to build another application for France business. Business is same, but according to this country, it will change in several tax terms, conditions and all. Business is same, but some changes will be there inside this application. So will they build that entire application again? They will not build entire application again. Now what IBM will do is, IBM will design a template. And this template, they roll out in this France business. They roll this template for the France business by making changes according to France requirements. That means what application they built for India, for that they design a template. And the template means it contains all the skeleton type predefined. Just you need to put the real data into it. This kind of projects are called as rollout. We call this kind of projects as rollout. Rollout project means we built an application for one business, for one country, same we want to use for another, then we will not build again. We will design a template and roll the template there. We call this as rollout. During these rollouts only people are sent on site. I hope you know people go on site. Majority of people, why they go on site? Why they are sent on site? Two situations. One, upgrade, or it may be rollouts. Mostly in upgrade and rollouts only we send people on site. That means this template need to be rolled out for France business. Then what we do in our company, the persons who worked on that project for several years, we send them to France location, saying that you go, you sit with the client, and according to the client requirements, you implement with this team, you do all this work and come back. That means for 1 year, for 2 years, or some 6 months, this person who have experience on this project, he sent on site. What is his responsibility? To roll out the template there, because he already have experience on that application. Just according to France business, he need to roll out. Team will be supporting to him from India offline, right? The online they will be supporting. But why those people go on site? Majority of the people go on site for two situations. One is for rollouts, another for upgrades. Mostly that is the situation actually. Then what happens after rollout is finished? They will come back again to the parent company. Sometimes client says that this person I want, so I will keep him here only. Then he can continue. That means sometimes people go to on-site and permanently they can be there because client wants them, client requirements. Depends. Like this is rollout. This is one situation. Another situation is nothing but this is one situation. This is rollout. Here we need what? In this rollout, we need what? Templates. We need templates. That means we need templates so that our developers can roll out those templates. Okay. Another point, another situation is, suppose this IBM company is working for, this IBM company is building an application for a bank like HDFC. For HDFC bank, we are building application. But bank have lot of private data. That means we are building everything, every application. Bank have a lot of private data. Like suppose credit cards, customer informations and everything will be, it is very private. Now, if IBM is building application for HDFC, now will HDFC give all the private data to IBM? Without giving data, how they can build application? Understood the point? That means all your passwords, IDs, everything, credit card numbers, because credit card number, password, PIN number, all should be verified online. It should be verified online. That means for that people have to write program. Then all developers are given with all your passwords, all your data. No. Generally what happens is they build application, but certain modules which contains private data. For example, suppose we have credit card. Now what HDFC says is, HDFC says that for credit card module, you design a template and give to us. That means they will ask IBM to design a template and give to this HDFC. HDFC people, I hope you don't know that HDFC people have their own developers. Java developer, .NET developer, their own. Very rare such jobs will be there. Very rare. Because they will be only 1-2 members, 3-4 members team. Very rare such jobs will be there. But there will be there. There will be there. For example, and you see, just let's search Naukri site. If we are lucky enough, we can find that job if it is there. HDFC Bank. So see, generally HDFC Bank jobs means they ask for what kind of people, relationship manager, all these. But let's see, anywhere they asking for Java developer or not. Java developer, .NET developer, some anywhere, if we are lucky enough, we can get that job. These are all bankers, bank related managers, relationship managers, sales officers. And very rarely you will find such kind of jobs you can find here. Let me filter more. HDFC Bank sales officers. You can see this is, this is data scientist. Yeah. Right. This is one job we found. This is data science, Python. Right. This is HDFC Bank, and see the package. 1 to 6 years experience in normal companies also, they don't get this much package. Starting 14 lakhs. Starting 14 lakhs. Now, you can see somewhere you will find a Java developer also may be there. So, but they are very rare, because once they got such people, very rare. I will suppose here HDFC Bank, say Java. So table developer, very rarely, but you saw that. So they have a Java develop, means if they have requirement, they will post. If they don't have, but very rarely you will find such requirements, right? Okay, just HDFC, ICICI, any bank you can search. Okay, we got one result. Na? You saw that Python, the manager Python requirement is there for data scientist, right? For HDFC Bank. And very important is you saw their salary, so approximately, so 14 lakhs starting. That is asking for 1 to 6 years experience, minimum. But why so much package for those people? Why? Because what is the responsibility of a Java developer in HDFC Bank? The developer's responsibility is nothing but these people built templates and given to us. Now remember, this Java developer is a kind of bank employee only now. He works for HDFC Bank payroll. He is direct bank employee. That means he have to sign all the agreements related to private data and everything. What is his responsibility? His responsibility is to implement these templates. Whatever templates developed by the company, he will take those templates and he will put the original data into the templates and make them work. That is his responsibility. That is the reason their pay scales are very high. Why? Because they will be very less in number. That means for every branch, means for every zone, like North zone, South zone, like for every zone, only 2-3 people will be there. Only 2-3 people. Their job also highly risky. Why? Because they need to do all the work by themselves. Only 2-3 people have to support. That's very risky. That is the reason the packages are very high. That means templates are in two situations. One situation is rollout. Another situation is in this kind of scenario. In this kind of scenario, what they need developers who can implement the templates. Now, what is our responsibility? We designed classes, but we need to design a template now. We need to design a template. This template contains some sample data. This template contains some sample data. What we have to do is we have to take this data and implement with our original content. And we need to make it work, make it functional. So that is the responsibility. And how we design templates. That means template contains some methods, some actions already defined. Some actions already defined. It contains some actions incomplete. Now we have two types of actions. Some are completed, some are incomplete. So the completed actions, we use them. Incompleted, we will complete. As a developer, we complete them. Now these completed, incompleted concepts, incompleted content are called as abstract. Those incompleted content are called abstracts. We call as abstracts. And these templates are called as abstract classes. That means if anybody asked you, what is the purpose of abstract class in object-oriented programming? The purpose of abstract class in object-oriented programming is to design templates. Abstract classes are used for design templates. What is the purpose of template? Template contains some functionality implemented, some functionality need to be implemented. And we take that abstract and we implement the complete functionality. That means why developers design abstract classes. When they design abstract classes, these are the situations. One is rollout situation, another one private modules. When we are designing private modules with private data, and when we are designing rollouts, in that case, we need abstract classes. That means what is the purpose of interface? The purpose of interface is to design contracts. That is, those are the technical words we learned, right? Interfaces are used for designing contracts. Classes are used for designing entities and models. Classes are used for entities and models. And abstract classes are used for templates. So abstract classes are used for templates. Why they are called abstract? What is the meaning of abstract? We have to learn. Now how to create these abstract classes and implement. That we will see in next session. Tomorrow we will do that. Okay. In tomorrow's session, we will discuss what are abstract classes and how to implement, how to design templates. Okay. That is the very important concept in entire features, OOP features. Tomorrow we'll see.